I took one look at Caleb's face and knew something was wrong. His eyes were glazed over, his jaw clenched tight. "Caleb, your father was in a serious accident. He fell off the roof while fixing it." He barely reacted, just a slight raise of his eyebrows. "What do you want me to do?" "My conference call is starting." I couldn't believe his indifference. "He's in critical condition. We need to go to the hospital." Caleb waved a dismissive hand. "Honestly, it saves me the trouble of dealing with his crap." My heart sank as he turned away, already focused on his laptop and that stupid call. I grabbed my purse and hurried out, tears stinging my eyes. What happened to the man I married? At the hospital, a grim-faced doctor updated me on Walter's condition: traumatic brain injury, multiple fractures, and internal bleeding. It didn't look good. I tried calling Caleb during his lunch break, but he didn't pick up. When he finally came home that evening, I confronted him. "Your father could die, and you didn't even show up." Caleb loosened his tie like my words meant nothing. "I have a client dinner tonight. Handle this yourself." The callousness in his voice made me sick. "He's your family, Caleb. Don't you care at all?" "He always belittled me," he snapped. "Now his retirement funds can finally become mine." I stared at this stranger before me, realizing our marriage was already dead. The man I loved was gone, replaced by this cold, greedy shell. As I lay awake that night, I knew things would never be the same. Over the next few days, Walter's condition remained critical. The nurses filled me in on the gruesome details: brain hemorrhaging, collapsed lungs, and severe internal injuries. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was Caleb checking in, but he never called. Finally, I caught him during his lunch break. "Caleb, it's your father?" "The doctors say it's really bad." There was a long pause before he replied, his tone flat. "Look, Hazel, I don't have time for this right now. Can we talk later?" "Don't you even care?" I cried, my voice cracking. "He could be dying." "We both know my old man's a fighter," he said dismissively. "I'm sure he'll pull through." I wanted to scream at him to make him understand how much pain Walter was in, but Caleb had already checked out of the conversation. That night, I waited up until well past midnight, the house dark and silent. When Caleb finally strutted through the door, I could smell the whiskey on his breath. "There you are," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your father's hanging on by a thread at the hospital." Caleb shrugged off his suit jacket. "And? What do you want from me, Hazel?" My mouth fell open at his indifference. This was his own flesh and blood. "I want you to act like you have a heart," I shouted, "to show some basic human decency and compassion." Caleb's gaze turned ice cold. "You know how my father treated me growing up. He got what he deserved with that fall." I recoiled, horrified by his cruel words. In that moment, I saw him for the monster he truly was. As the days went by, I split my time between work and the hospital, holding vigil by Walter's bedside. Caleb didn't so much as call or visit once. His selfishness and greed had fully consumed him. As the weeks dragged on, memories of the past kept resurfacing. I recalled the tense family dinners when Walter would grill Caleb about his grades and career ambitions. No matter how well Caleb did, it was never enough for his domineering father. "You need to toughen up and stop being so sensitive," Walter would bark. "The corporate world won't coddle you." Young Caleb would shrink back, lips pressed into a thin line as he nodded obediently. But I saw the resentment flickering in his eyes, anger simmering just beneath the surface. Now, sitting by Walter's bedside, I couldn't help but connect the dots between that childhood trauma and Caleb's disturbing indifference today. Had his father's emotional abuse irrevocably damaged their relationship? My friends tried convincing me to cut Caleb loose. "He's shown you who he really is, Hazel. Why are you still putting up with his crap?" Part of me knew they were right, but another part, the part still clinging to the man I fell in love with years ago, couldn't let go so easily. The hospital staff saw my internal struggle play out daily. "You can't keep running yourself ragged like this," the nurses would gently chide me. "If you don't take care of yourself, you won't be able to take care of him." Reluctantly, I started scaling back my hours at work, despite the looming deadlines. If Caleb wasn't going to step up for his own father, then I would have to shoulder that responsibility myself. A few days later, during a routine visit, one of Walter's eyes fluttered open while I was sitting next to him. "Walter?" I gasped, grabbing his hand. "Can you hear me? Squeeze if you can." His battered fingers twitched ever so slightly against my palm. A wave of relief washed over me, quickly replaced by dread over how to break the news to his callous son. I tried calling Caleb right away to share the good news about Walter, but he didn't pick up. Not that I was surprised at this point. When he finally sauntered in around midnight, I could tell from the sly grin on his face that he'd been out with his slimy coworkers again. "Where have you been?" I demanded, hands on my hips. "I've been trying to reach you all evening." Caleb poured himself a scotch, not even looking at me. "Just out with the boys, blowing off some steam." "Well, your father's condition has changed," I said, hoping to finally get a reaction out of him. "He's regained consciousness." Caleb paused, the glass halfway to his lips. For a fleeting moment, I saw a glimmer of something in his eyes. Surprise? Concern? It was quickly extinguished by a callous shrug. "I'm sure the old man will milk this for all it's worth," he muttered before downing his drink. My jaw went slack at his unbelievable insensitivity. How could he be so heartless towards his own family? The next few days passed in a painful funk. Caleb continued his neglectful behavior, stumbling in at ungodly hours reeking of alcohol and perfume that definitely wasn't mine. Then one night, he didn't even try to be discreet. A ledgy blonde in a tight red dress waltzed right in after him, giggling drunkenly. "Who is she?" I gasped, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Caleb draped his arm around her shoulders. "Hazel, meet Linda. Linda Monroe. The woman, Linda." Smirked at me like we were rivals. "Nice to finally meet you." You've been cheating on me?" I sputtered, struggling to process the betrayal. "Guilty," Caleb said with a shameless grin. He tossed a manila envelope at my feet. "Sign those divorce papers and you'll be free of me for good." The room started spinning as I opened the envelope with trembling hands. There it was in black and white. Our marriage was over. Just like that. In the days after Caleb dropped that bombshell, I felt numb, like I was moving through a waking nightmare. I poured all my energy into visiting Walter at the hospital, if only to escape the suffocating misery at home. To my relief, Walter's condition was slowly improving. The nurses said he was responding well to treatment and could likely be discharged to a rehab facility soon. I tried sharing these hopeful updates with Caleb, but he just scoffed and changed the subject. Then one afternoon, as I was sitting by Walter's bedside, his eyes fluttered open again. This time, they focused on me with startling clarity. "Hazel." His gravelly voice was little more than a whisper. I grasped his hand, fighting back tears of joy. "I'm here, Walter. You're going to be okay." He squeezed my fingers with what little strength he had. "I'm not blind, you know. I've seen how Caleb's been treating you, and me." My heart sank as I nodded mutely. There was no use denying the truth anymore. Walter's expression hardened. "He's planning to take everything once I'm gone, isn't he?" "Yes," I admitted quietly. "He served me with divorce papers the other night, said it would free him of his burden." Anger flashed in Walter's eyes, giving him a sudden burst of energy. "That ungrateful little—" He trailed off, sucking in a pained breath. I leaned forward, squeezing his hand again. "What is it? What were you going to say?" Walter fixed me with an intense stare. "Not if we play our cards right, Hazel. Are you with me?" I didn't hesitate. After everything Caleb had put us through, I was done being a helpless victim. "I'm in. What did you have in mind?" A faint smile tugged at the corner of Walter's cracked lips. "We're going to take back what's rightfully yours and leave that scumbag son of mine with nothing." Over the next few weeks, Walter and I hatched our plan in hushed conversations at the hospital. He insisted on keeping things discreet until the time was right to strike. Finally, after being discharged to a rehab facility, Walter gave me the green light. "Get Caleb and that mistress of his over to the house this Saturday. I want to see the look on their smug faces." I tried to mask my nervousness as I called Caleb that week. "Hey, your father wanted to have us all over for dinner on Saturday. You know, one last family meal before—" "Before the old man kicks the bucket?" Caleb finished with a snort. "Yeah, I suppose we can humor him. Linda and I will be there." When Saturday evening arrived, Caleb strutted through the door with Linda clinging to his arm, both of them looking completely at ease. My stomach twisted into knots seeing them like that in my home. "All right, Pops, we're here," Caleb announced as they sauntered into the living room. "What's so important that you—" He trailed off, eyes widening, because there was Walter sitting upright in his wheelchair, staring them down with undisguised contempt. You're awake? Caleb sputtered. Walter's mouth curled into a cold smile. Surprised? You really shouldn't be. I raised you better than this, Caleb. Or so I thought. Caleb and Linda exchanged a panicked look as the blood drained from their faces. Clearly this wasn't the feeble, helpless old man they were expecting. What's going on here? Linda hissed, clutching Caleb's arm. Walter turned his withering glare on her. Miss Monroe, I suggest you exit this conversation before it gets truly unpleasant. She opened her mouth to protest, but Caleb silenced her with a shake of his head. Smart man, knowing when to fold. What do you want from us? Caleb asked tightly. Isn't it obvious? Walter replied. I want to avoid having my entire life's work, my legacy, inherited by an ungrateful, dishonorable snake like you. Caleb's face turned an ugly shade of red as Walter's words hit home. For the first time, a flicker of fear entered his eyes. What are you saying? He demanded through gritted teeth. That you're cutting me out? After everything I've done for this family? Walter barked out a harsh laugh. Done for the family? Don't make me laugh, boy. You've been working against us this whole time with your selfish scheming. Caleb opened his mouth, but I cut him off, suddenly feeling emboldened. Don't even try denying it. We know all about your shady dealings at the law firm. Reaching into my purse, I pulled out a thick manila envelope and tossed it on the coffee table with a thud. Bank statements, phone records, everything implicating you in financial misconduct and misappropriation of client funds. Caleb went deathly pale as he stared at the damning evidence. Linda was gaping at him in shock and horror. You set me up? Caleb wheezed, turning to his mistress. Is that what this is? Linda quickly shook her head, backing away from him. No, Caleb, I swear. I didn't know any of this. I felt a pang of satisfaction seeing the panic in her eyes as she realized her little fantasy world was crumbling. That's not all, son, Walter interjected coldly. There's also the matter of my will. Caleb's head whipped around so fast I thought his neck might snap. Your will? Indeed. Walter straightened up in his wheelchair. A recent amendment stating that in order to inherit my assets and my share of the construction business, you must be considered in good standing with the family. He let that bombshell linger for a moment before delivering the killing blow, which, after the way you've treated Hazel and me these past months, you most certainly are not. Caleb looked like he'd been gut-punched as the realization set in. Not only had he lost his inheritance, he might be facing criminal charges and disbarment as well. You can't do this, he sputtered weakly. But the fight had already drained from his eyes, replaced by the hollow, empty stare of a man who knew he'd lost everything. The divorce proceedings with Caleb were thankfully swift and clean. He put up little resistance, likely realizing how damning the evidence against him was. Within a matter of weeks, that chapter of my life was officially closed. As for Linda, well, let's just say she didn't take too kindly to being deceived and used as a pawn. I overheard a nasty confrontation between them outside the courthouse, her shrill voice echoing off the stone walls. You lied to me, Caleb. About everything. Your money, your future, all of it. His reply was little more than a pathetic mumble. Linda, baby, you've got to understand. Don't baby me, you scumbag. We're through, completely through. The clicking of her heels faded away, leaving Caleb alone with the wreckage of his selfish decisions. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction seeing his world crumble. In the months that followed, I focused my energy on getting the family construction business back in order. Walter had fortunately reversed course just in time, amending his will to leave me as the primary inheritor and trustee. You're the only one I can trust to do the right thing, Hazel, he told me gruffly. Though his body remained frail, there was a renewed spark in his eyes. This company was my life's work. I want to see it restored to its former glory. With those words etched in my mind, I rolled up my sleeves and dug into the company finances. Needless to say, years of Caleb's unchecked greed and mismanagement had taken their toll. But I was determined to right those wrongs, no matter how daunting the task. I made the tough decisions, downsizing, restructuring, even selling off certain assets to get us back on solid footing. All the while, I kept Walter looped in, knowing his sharp eye for detail would help guide us. Slowly but surely, the renewed spirit of integrity began permeating every level of the business. Jobs were completed on time, clients were satisfied, and our reputation started to rebuild. Sadly, Walter didn't live to see the complete revitalization. But in his final months, I made sure to keep him involved every step of the way, knowing how much this all meant to him. "You've made me proud, Hazel," he wheezed one afternoon, grasping my hand with what little strength he had left. "Finally putting things right like they should have been all along." Tears blurred my vision as I leaned down and gently kissed his forehead. "For you, Walter, and for me, for a fresh start and a legacy we can be proud of."